Hey everybody. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can create a stock market dashboard like this. So you can see some major indicators, how the markets are doing, some business news from some of the top websites, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and also the top and bottom performing stocks of the day as pulled from Yahoo Finance, and also some upcoming IPOs to look out for. So I'm going to show you how to create this dashboard from scratch. And if you have trouble following along or you just want to use my version, I'll leave a link in the description for this video, and so you can either follow along or just download the file yourself, and I'll leave all the links and everything still active. And so to start, I'm going to pull data from Google Sheets. I can pull stock prices in Excel using the stock history function, but to get more recent quotes, I'm going to use Google Sheets, where I can also import these news articles. So I'm going to start right there. So I've got a blank Google Sheets document over here, and so I'm just going to call this stock summary. And what I'm going to do is start with just labeling some of these indicators I'm going to use. So Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P 500, tech, and healthcare. And what I'm going to do is use the Google Finance function within Google Sheets, where I can select Dow Jones Industrial and then pull the price for it. I can also get the change percentage, which tells me how much it moved that in the current day. I'm going to divide it by 100 just so it goes into a percentage. Apply the formatting. There we go, so move 1%. So if I use Control D, I'll copy the formula from above, and then all I need to do now is just update the ticker symbol. So IXIC for the NASDAQ. It's going to give me that data. For the S&P 500, it's INX. And so for these indexes, you're going to have a period in front, but for these stocks here, or these funds rather, I'm just going to use their ticker symbols, XLK and XLK. And I mean, you can use obviously other funds or other stocks that you want to track. I'm just using these because these are some broad tech and healthcare funds, so that they can give you a bit of an idea as to how those sectors are doing in the current day. So I got those set up. So I'm going to rename this sheet to just say markets, and I'm going to create a new one for news. Okay, and this is where I'm going to pull in the news articles. So the key to making this work is you just need to find an RSS feed for whatever news site you want to pull information from. So I've got three that I'm going to use. The first one's going to be from CNBC. And on Google Sheets, you've got an import feed function that you can use, where you just have to enter the URL. So that's the RSS feed for CNBC. So this is, if you want to find this, I suggest going into Google and just typing the CNBC space RSS or whatever combination of whatever news source you're looking for. Not all of them will have an RSS feed, depending on what site you're going for, but that's how you can find an RSS feed reasonably easily in most cases. So for the query, I'm going to set it to items because this will pull everything. For headers, I'm just going to set this to true, but it really doesn't matter. The number of items, I'm going to set it to 10 because I don't want it to get excessively large. And so now it's going to pull in the title, the URL, the date it was created, and also the summary. So that's what were the top stories on CNBC. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for the Wall Street Journal. Now I've already got these links set up, but I'm going to go to import feed again, URL. So you'll notice for the Wall Street Journal, it's not a URL you'd be able to predict. So that's why I say doing a search is probably your best bet if you want to try to find these. Again, the same parameters, items, true and 10. And again, same sort of layout. You've got the title, you've got the URL, and even a summary. Lastly, I'm going to pull data from the New York Times. Okay, so import feed, URL, again, items, true, and 10. New York Times is a little bit different. It's got this extra category for author, but that really doesn't matter. Again, I'm just really interested in the title and the URL, because I want to set up the dashboard so that shows the title and it allows me to click on it and open that article if I do want to read it. So now this is the main parts that I wanted to do with Google Sheets. The last thing I need to do here is to actually create these links that I can import into Power Query into Excel. So I'm going to go to File and Share and Publish to the web. And so I'm going to first select the Markets tab and hit the Publish button. I'm going to hit OK. And now it gives me this link. And so I can use this now to put this into Power Query into Excel to load this data. And so that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to copy this, and now I'm going to jump into Excel. So now what I'm going to do is go into the Data tab and hit the From Web button. And I'm going to paste that URL that I copied, press OK. And now Excel is going to pull in the data that it recognizes from that file. And so I'm going to select table 0, which contains my data, and I'm going to hit the transform data button, just because before I load that, I want to get rid of the first 2 columns in there, which really didn't have any useful information in there. So to remove columns in Power Query is really simple. I just right-click, remove, right-click, remove, and those are good to go. Now I can hit the close and load button, and when that happens, Power Query is going to load the data into a new sheet for me. And so what I'm going to do now is rename this my data tab, and I can rename the query itself, and I'm just going to call this let's say markets. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is go over and now pull in the news articles. So now that I'm back into Google Sheets, I just switch from markets over to news, hit publish, again hit OK, and now it gives me that new URL. So Control C to copy, and then back in Excel now, again back to that data from web button, paste that URL into here. And I'm going to follow the same sort of steps, get rid of those extra columns, and load it next to this markets query that I've already got set up. So again, it's going to be table 0, transform data. And again, we're just going to remove those first 2 columns at the start there. Remove and remove. And this time, instead of just hitting close load, I'm going to hit close and load 2. And this way, it's not going to create a whole new sheet for me. It's just going to allow me to select where I want to load the data. Okay, so as you can see now I can specify I want to put an existing worksheet, and I'm fine with just putting it right there. So I'm going to hit OK. And now it's going to load those articles in there. So you can see they're nicely separated just because there are 10 each, so I don't have to worry about them overlapping, because it's only going to pull 10 for each of them. Now I'm not done importing data just yet. The next thing I'm going to do is import the top 20 gainers, as Yahoo calls them, on their website. And this is the top performing stocks of the day. So I'm going to select row 20 here for now. And I'm going to go back to data from web, and I'm going to use a link from Yahoo. You can see this is finance.yahoo.com, gainers, and it gives me the top 100. So obviously you can change this based on how many you need. I'm going to hit OK, and now it's going to pull in the data from there. And in this case, it's again going to be table 0 that I'm going to be pulling the results from. Might take a bit of time to pull depending on how quickly the server is on Yahoo. Okay, so now I've got document and table 0, and again I'm going to go back to transform data, just because I don't want all of these columns in there. Anytime you're making a dashboard, you always want to conserve space wherever you can, just to make sure it's not terribly wide, and make it a bit more user-friendly by saving on space. So I've got, the symbol, the name of the company, the price, the dollar change, and the percent change. Now, I want to focus on the percent change, so I'm going to get rid of the dollar change. Okay, we've also got volume and average volume, which I'm going to use later on, so I'll keep those. The market cap might be useful, so I'll leave that. PE ratio, a lot of them are NA, so I'm going to remove that. 52-week range doesn't have anything, so I'm going to remove that. So that is good to go, and now I'm going to hit close and load to, and I'm going to load it right here in A20. Okay, so I'm going to select existing worksheet, A20, hit OK, and wait for that to load. And then the next thing I'm going to import is now the bottom performing stocks of the day, the top 100 losers, or what Yahoo has them called. And it's going to have a similar table, except the one main difference I'm going to need to do is flip those negative percent changes into positives. So back to data and from web, and this time I'm going to use the losers link. Okay. And again, it's going to be the same type of layout, same type of columns that I'm going to be removing. The only difference is that the percent changes are going to be negative. And because I want to use these percentages in a chart, I don't want them to be negative. I'm going to flip them into positive percentages, even though they're technically negative. But because I got one table that's gains, one table that's losses, it's really not necessary to put in the negative. Okay, so it's going to be table 0 again. I'm going to transform the data again. And same sort of thing. I'm going to get rid of the dollar change, remove that, get rid of the PE ratio, and the 52-week range. Now, again, so these percentages are negative. So what I'm going to want to do is select all these and then transform them. So I'm going to go under the standard drop down here, and there's an option to multiply. So I'm going to multiply this entire column, and I'm just going to use a factor of -1. Hit OK, and now you'll notice all those negatives are gone. So that's good to go now. Back to the Home tab, close and load to. And I'm going to leave a bit of an extra space here just because there's going to be an extra column calculation I'm going to add towards the end of this. And so I just want to leave a bit of space just to make sure I'm not overlapping. So existing worksheet again. This time I don't want A20. So skip a couple spaces, put that in there, and hit OK. So I've got one more data download that I'm going to do, and then I can start working on actually designing the dashboard. And that's going to be from IPOscoop.com. And so that website has a convenient IPO calendar. So again, from web one last time here, and put in that URL. And so the cool thing about this is, even if you don't know what's the next big IPO, with this calendar you can see what's coming up in the next week or so. So if there's something that perks your interest, it's easy to keep on top of that. So again, I'm going to transform data again and remove some unnecessary columns that I don't need. Okay, and so we've got the company, we've got the proposed ticker symbol, which is fine. Don't really need this lead managers, I don't think. We can get rid of this. Price low, price high. Let's say the estimated volume, and let's say the expected trading date. Remove and remove. And now what I'm going to do though is I want this estimated volume to be in dollars, and so I right now it's in text, so I need to change this. So one of the things I can do is add a column and use columns from examples. So this is going to parse out exactly what I need. So I could try to use a complex formula in Power Query or go through their parsing tools, but I can really easily just type in, let's say, the number that I want, 300, and Power Query's figured out that I don't want the text to come after, nor do I want the $sign. And for this one, 8951.4, it pulls 8951, which is just fine. I'm going to hit OK. And now I've got that. And now I'm going to convert this to currency, just so it's a dollar amount that I can use in my chart later on. So the cool thing about Power Query is once I no longer have a need for a column, I can just remove it, because all these steps are recorded along the way, so I don't have to worry that it's going to cause a problem. Same thing with this expected to trade. Let's say I don't want this week of priced or Friday or whatever. I can go back to column from examples, and then this time just type in, let's say 3/8/2021, and now again it's figured out exactly what I want. Okay, and so again I can remove this, and then expected date. Okay, and that looks okay to go. And let's go to close and load to one more time. And for this one, I'm just going to move it next to these gain and loss tables, just so that I've got everything in the same place. So again, leave a bit of an extra gap here, put that one in there. And so that one is good to go. So the one thing I'm going to go and do to differentiate these is on the table design section, I'm just going to use a blue outline for this one. For the losses, Excel doesn't have a red table by default, so I'm going to use orange, which is the next closest thing. So now I've got my table set up. The one thing I'm going to do though before moving forward is I'm going to rename these queries just so they're a bit cleaner. So this one was news. If I select this one was, whoops, I didn't mean to refresh it. Let's cancel the refresh. Rename top 100. Rename this to bottom 100. And let's call this one IPO. So now that those ones are set up, I'm going to move on to my next step. So now that I'm going to get into the designing of the dashboard, the one thing that's going to help is if you standardize your column widths. So I'm going to right click column width on everything and set everything to a width of 10. Okay, and the benefit of this is it's a lot easier to space things out. And while I'm doing that, the one thing that I'll point out with these tables is to avoid them stretching back out when you update them, you'll want to go in the table design for each one of them, and under properties, make sure you've got this box unchecked, adjust column width. Otherwise, these are going to stretch out every time you go into and to refresh your queries, and then all your work of trying to align your dashboard just right is going to all go for naught. So now that I've unchecked all those, I know that if I refresh, it's not going to cause a problem. So if I go to data, refresh all, let's say, we can see here these queries being updated, and once they stop spinning, you can see that they've loaded, and there's no issue so far with updating any of these. So the larger the query, the longer it'll take, but you can see these have loaded now, and nothing's been stretched out. So I'm okay with moving on and working on designing the dashboard. So what I'm going to do is start with pulling in the market indicators. So from my data tab. So I want to pull in these values. So I'm going to rename this sheet to dashboard just to make it clear. That's what I'm going to be using it for. And so I'm going to start, let's say in D3, I'm going to reference, the Dow Jones value. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to sort this from largest to smallest. So that way it's always going to be looking at the first one, the first cell when it goes to update. So this one's referencing A2, which is tech. And I'm going to copy these down and just space these out a little bit. Now I'm dragging these just so I keep these links intact. And so that way when the query refreshes, it's always going to be the best performing indicator at the front, and then at the end is going to be the worst performing one. Okay, so we've got tech, and this is from that fund that I used. That's what that number represents. And I'm just copy all these. And then the last one I'm going to use is the percentage column. Copy this down, put these underneath. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is start with the first one and just merge and center. Put it off to the right. Maybe bold this, set it to a size 20. Do the same for this one. Bold. Let's make this a bit bigger at size 36. Get rid of the decimal places and put in a comma separator. Again, merge. And then this will be a percentage. And bold, let's make it a bit bigger at size 16. And so what I'm going to do is I'm also by default going to set this to green with white text, because I'm going to assume by default it's a positive number, but I'm going to set up some conditional formatting just in case that isn't the situation. So what I can do now is, now that I've got those, I can use the format painter, click on it twice, and now it's going to apply the same formatting for all these other indicators. So now what I'm going to do is create some conditional formatting. None of these are negative, but I'm going to show you how it's going to work. So I'm going to select all these values, go to conditional formatting, create a new rule, and I'm going to use a formula for this one. So for the conditional formatting, I want it to look for if one of these values is negative. So I'm going to type equals this is less than 0. So if that's true, I want the conditional formatting to apply. Now, I do not want to lock it to column D, because I want this to move depending on, which cell it's in. So if this value is true, if it's less than 0, I want to format it so that the fill color is red and the font is white. I'm going to hit OK. And right now, nothing's going to show up because these are all positive. But let's just say I override these formulas, put -1 and all of them. And you can see my conditional formatting is working. So I'm going to undo that. Just wanted to show you that it does work. And so now what I'm going to do is move on to the next stage. So the next piece now I'm going to do is pull in those news articles. So I'm going to put these right underneath these indicators. So I'm going to say, let's call this top stories from CNBC. And I'm going to make this a few columns wide. Bold it, and what I'm going to use is the hyperlink formula, because I'm going to select the link location and the name that should appear. So for CNBC, I'm going to grab the URL here, the title here, copy this all the way down until I've got my 10 links, and I'll make them not look like normal links. So I'm going to get rid of the underline, change the font color to black. And I got to be careful not to click these because I don't want to open the link. But that's ideally what I wanted to do, is that if I click on it, it'll open it up. So I'm going to wrap the text, merge it, and what I'm going to use is the format painter again to basically copy that formatting all the way down. And actually I want to align these to the left. And what I'm going to do is change the row height here to 30, just so it can accommodate multiple rows. Select all these, and let's add some borders in between them, and maybe even just some different backgrounds, just to sort of differentiate them a little bit. So I'm going to use that same format, copy this over, a little bit of space, put top stories now from the Wall Street Journal. And this time I'm going to change the hyperlink and go back into here for the URL and for the title. Copy this all the way down. Use my format painter again. Select all this. Now we've got that good to go. Copy this over one more time. This time top stories from the New York Times. Again, hyperlink. And the good thing about the consistency in in these downloads is that these values are always going to be in the same place. So I don't have to worry about creating any complex formulas or VLOOKUPs. So again, use the Format Painter again. And there we go. So now I've got my stories all pulled in from those three sources. And actually the one thing I'm going to do as well is make these in the middle. So just for these ones that just have one line, so they're not at the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is move on to the next part. And that involves setting up some charts, some visuals for these tables down here. So I'm going to change these row heights as well, change them to a row height of 30, just to space them out as well, just in case, and use the wrap text, especially for the ones that have the company names, which might be a bit big and not fit within that range. So I'm going to insert some rows again, just to create some space. And what I'm going to do is update these change percentages so they actually look like percentages. And I'm going to first create a chart for the gains. Okay, so I'm going to go to Insert, and I can just go to Recommended Charts, and then switch over to All Charts, and I'm going to use the tree map, which looks like this. Looks a bit messy and looks like a fun house of colors, but I'm going to fix that in a sec. So first, I'm going to get rid of the legend because I've already got the ticker names in there. So that's not really helpful. I'm going to change the color so it's a bit more gradual. I'm going to start with dark greens fading into light greens. I can use this nice dark background here. Get rid of this legend again. Anytime you select these styles, it's going to override the settings that you've already applied. So I'm going to change this title to say Top 100 and plop this over here. Now what I'll probably want to do is expand this a little. I could insert some more rows, but I can also just stretch it out to make it a bit bigger. And again, let's make this stand out a bit more. And then what you could do is shrink the font a little bit more if you wanted to, just to fit in some more letters in there. And then I'm going to format data labels because I want that percentage to show up. So I'm going to select the value. And so now I can quickly get a glimpse of the top ticker symbols and how many percentage points they were up, right? So you've got the highest and the lowest. And so here you've got a bit less information, but again, you can stretch this out if you really want to see everything. But I think the most important ones you're going to see is at the start here. So I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom 100. So I'm going to select both of these. And the reason I'm not selecting everything in this table, because if I do so, it's going to take a while to fix up my chart so it looks like this. So I'm just selecting the fields I want for my chart. So I'm going to go to Insert. Again, I can go to Recommended, swap over to All Charts, and go to the tree map. Same sort of deal here. I'll use this dark format right off the bat. Get rid of this. And then I'll change the colors, again, to use that dark orange. And this is going to be the bottom 100. Okay. And so now I'm just going to try to align these up so it's a bit smooth, right? And that looks reasonably close. And let's go to Format Data Labels, put in a value there, and so now I've got my bottom 100. So the next one is going to be my upcoming IPOs. So what I'm going to do now is, I didn't rename this, but this should be the estimated volume, and what I'm going to do is sort this from largest to smallest. Okay, and so what I'm going to do here is use the symbol and the estimated volume and go back to Insert, and again use that tree map. Press OK. Use the dark formatting. Get rid of this. Okay, and then again, I'm going to format the labels to put in the values in there, and then change the color scheme, so I'm using the dark blue. Okay, and now again, let's align this so it's reasonably close to the other ones, so there's not much of a gap. And I can call this upcoming IPOs. So instead of looking at the table, I can just look at, okay, what are the bigger ones coming up in the next few days or weeks. So now I've got the top and bottom 100. I've got upcoming IPOs, stories, and I've got my overview. I'm also going to get rid of the grid lines here just because I've already got some formatting around it just to make it a bit cleaner. Now there's going to be, I'm almost at the end here, so the one thing I'm going to do now is add that one column or one field that I mentioned I was leaving to the end here, and that's because this is a bit of a more complicated one, but I think it could be a bit helpful, especially when you're looking at big movers on the day, and that's going to be the relative volume, because right now we've got the volume for the day and we've got the 3-month average volume. So if you see a stock making a big move but there's not a whole lot of volume behind it, that's putting it into a bit different context than a stock that's made a big move and there's been a lot of movement behind it, a lot more than usual. But the problem here, though, as you can see, is this average volume on Yahoo. Some of them, they contain M's for millions. Otherwise, it's thousands. I haven't seen billions show up on here, but that could be a possibility as well. So the problem is that you've got these different values that sometimes have letters behind them, and so it's not as easy as just saying, take this value and divide it by this value or whatever the case may be. So I've already created a formula for this, and this is where I say it'll come in handy if you want to follow along with the article accompanying this video, just because I've already done this formula and my intention isn't to try to go through it right here, but I'll explain it briefly as I load it in here. So let's say I'm going to call this volume change, and so the formula that I'm using is just basically parsing out these letters, saying, okay, if it's a B, we're using a factor of 1,000. If it's M, we're using a factor of 1. Otherwise, we're gonna divide it. We're gonna use this type of multiple and multiply it by these values. So it looks complicated, but it's really just taking those letters out. And so I'll explain this in a bit more detail in the article. I don't want to spend a whole lot more time doing it here. And so the benefit now is I can convert this into percentages to show you the percent change as far as volume goes. So this one had almost 6,200% change in volume. And another thing I'm going to show you how to do is format these percentages. So if I hit Control-1 to go to Format Cells, and I want to change this formatting to show 1,000 separator when the percentages are really high. So I can put the £, comma, pound, and then 0 percentage. And now you can see we've got that convenient comma separator, right? But the one thing I also want to do is have these negatives highlighted in red. So again, I'll hit Control-1, and what I'm going to do is put in a semicolon, put the word red in brackets, and do the exact same thing now. Pound, comma, pound, 0%. And so if this looks complicated, it's just really the semicolon that's saying, okay, if the value is positive, we're going to use this formatting. If it's negative, we're going to use this formatting. Some of them have an additional semicolon if the value is 0. So that's why some of these custom formats look a lot more complicated than they are. So you can see there's red to indicate there's going to be red color. There's other colors you can use as well, but for negatives, I'm going to use the red. And now you can see now my negative percentages are showing in red. Another thing I'm going to do just to emphasize these changes even more is use some conditional formatting. But I'm going to use something simple, just a color scale, just to emphasize where there's been big changes. So we can see that, Robinhood had a big percent change, but the volume was fairly low compared to what it normally is, 14 million versus the typical average of 24. So now it gives you a bit more context surrounding that move. So I'm going to copy this formula and repeat these steps over here as well. So volume change and copy this. So again, if you don't want to be bothered with trying to do this, if you want to do it yourself, you can just copy or you use the file that I'll link to here. And so again, control 1. Let's go into the custom and pound, comma, pound, pound, 0, percentage, semicolon, red, pound, comma, percentage. And that looks good. And conditional formatting and color scales, load those in there, so that looks good to go as well. So that's pretty much done at this point. What I'm going to do is maybe just add a header here in the very first row. Just put today's date. It's actually the today function, but I don't want it to show up like this. I want it to show up with a certain formatting. So I'm going to use the text function, 4 M's to show the full month, D for the day, and then space out for the year. Close that out, and then what I can do is just spread this across here, merge, bold, and then whatever sort of data that you wanted. So what you could do, some other ideas that you could have is, where I loaded this data tab, I had these different tickers. You could create a watch list of your own. Like if there's certain stocks that you wanted to pull in, you could put those and maybe even link to them down here or something like that, or again across maybe as well, depending on how big your watch list is or the stocks that you want to follow. But that's just one example of something else that you could do. So the one thing to note about this dashboard, it's not going to automatically refresh. To do that, you're actually going to have to go in the data tab and hit the refresh all button like I did earlier when I was refreshing these queries. And so that's just something to remember if you happen to look into the file and see that, hey, this is old data, that's why. So if I were to go to refresh here, now it's the end of the day, these numbers are not going to change, but you can check under the data, queries and connections if you want to monitor the progress. So these will be updating, but once they're done, they'll look like this, and then you'll know, okay, everything's loaded in there. Okay, so you can refresh this as often as you like. You can see it doesn't take terribly long. We're talking probably less than a minute, maybe less than 30 seconds to do so. And then you've got your updated stories. You've got all this data at your disposal. So if you have any suggestions or things you think should be added, by all means leave a note in the comments. This is I would say first attempt at creating a dashboard like this. Obviously, there's a lot more things that we can do. If you've got some ideas for other data sources, please let me know. Otherwise, hope you found this useful. And again, check out the link for more details, this file as well, and more in-depth overview as to these different steps, including that formula that I added at the end. Thank you for watching, and hope you found this useful.